People won't tell you this out loud, but they're used to your yes. They're used to calling, texting, needing, and always getting access to you. They're used to you dropping your own piece to fix their problems, carry their weight, or explain yourself over and over again. But the day you stop picking up every call, answering every message, and showing up every time someone snaps their fingers, everything begins to change. Because when you stop being available, you stop being taken for granted. You see, being constantly available isn't a sign of strength. It's not noble. It's often a slow leak of your own energy disguised as helpfulness. It's how you teach people to overlook your boundaries. You show up so much that they stop seeing you. And worse, you stop seeing yourself. You forget what stillness feels like. You forget what your own voice sounds like in the silence. But then comes the day you say, not this time. Maybe you don't pick up the phone. Maybe you let the message sit. Maybe you don't rush in to explain or defend. And suddenly, there's space. At first, it feels uncomfortable, like you're doing something wrong, like you're abandoning people. But really, you're just showing up for yourself for once. And that's unfamiliar territory. That space you create, it does something powerful. It reveals, it exposes who was really there for you and who was only there for what you could give. The ones who were using your availability as a convenience, they start to drift. Maybe they get upset. Maybe they call you distant. But others, the real ones, they adjust, they respect, they don't take it personally because they never expected you to be everything for them anyway. And here's the truth. When you stop being available to everyone, you start becoming more available to yourself, to your goals, to your peace, to your healing. That constant noise begins to fade. You start hearing your own clarity again. You start noticing what you've been missing, your own needs, your own joy, your own rest. People may say you've changed, and you have. You've stopped proving yourself. You've stopped performing for approval. You've stopped saying yes just to avoid guilt. You've stopped sacrificing your own well-being to keep others comfortable. And in doing so, you've stepped into your own power, quietly, firmly, completely. Because when you're always available, you teach people that your time, your energy, your presence, they're easy to access. But when you become intentional, when you pull back and protect yourself, you teach the world that you have value, that your peace matters, that not everyone gets access just because they ask for it. This isn't about becoming cold. It's not about revenge or resentment. It's about restoration. It's about balance. It's about finally treating yourself like someone who matters. So stop being constantly available. Let people adjust. Let them feel the change. Because you're not here to be everything to everyone. You're here to be whole for yourself. And when you walk in that wholeness, everything else will start to align. And that changes everything. Boundaries create clarity. It's one of the most powerful and underrated truths in life. When you stop being so available to everyone, something interesting starts to happen. People begin to understand where they stand in your life. They start to see the edges, the line between what you allow and what you don't. And that's not a bad thing. It's necessary because without boundaries, everything gets blurry. People cross lines they didn't even know existed. And you end up feeling exhausted, resentful, and unseen. The reason so many of us feel drained isn't because we're doing too much. It's because we're doing too much for people who don't respect our limits. And often it's because we haven't shown them what those limits are. When you draw a line and say, this is where I end and this is where you begin, you create a map, not just for others, but for yourself. You start to know what is your responsibility and what isn't. You learn how to say no without guilt and how to say yes with joy. You stop over-explaining. You stop apologizing for needing rest, for needing time, for needing space. And people might resist at first. They might accuse you of changing. They might even push back. But that's not a reflection of your worth. It's a reflection of how your lack of boundaries used to benefit them. Clarity doesn't mean conflict. It means truth. It means people understand what they can and cannot expect from you. It removes assumptions. It ends silent frustrations. It stops the cycle of overgiving and under-receiving. It doesn't make you mean, it makes you honest. When you're always available, always saying yes, always putting yourself last, you become foggy to others. They don't see the cost of your help. They don't see your exhaustion. They just see someone who is always there. And slowly, they stop appreciating the effort behind it. But when you create boundaries, suddenly they notice. They see your time as a gift. They see your attention as something earned, not owed. And here's the deeper truth. Boundaries aren't walls to keep people out. They're doors with locks to decide who gets in. You still get to love, to give, to care, but from a place of choice, not obligation. You become more present with the people who matter most. You show up more fully because you're not spread so thin. You no longer need to explain why you can't do everything because your life starts to explain it for you. You become clear, and in that clarity, you find peace, you find strength, you find yourself again. Energy has value. We tend to forget that our energy is a limited resource, not something we can hand out endlessly without consequences. Every time we say yes to something we don't want to do, every time we stay in a conversation that drains us, every time we make ourselves available to someone who constantly takes without giving, we're spending energy. Not just time, not just effort, energy. And unlike time, which resets every 24 hours, energy takes longer to replenish. You can sleep a full night and still wake up tired if your energy has been stretched thin by emotional demands and mental overload. When you start to understand this, when you start treating your energy like something valuable, everything changes. There's a quiet strength in pulling back from the things that don't feed you, in no longer answering every phone call, in no longer responding to every emotional emergency that doesn't belong to you. It's not about being selfish. It's about being sustainable. You cannot pour from an empty cup. You cannot keep showing up for everyone else while abandoning yourself in the process. The more available you are to others, the less available you become to your own needs, your own healing, your own dreams. That trade-off happens silently until one day you look up and realize you've been running on fumes. Protecting your energy doesn't require confrontation. It requires intention. It's the decision to not check your phone the moment it buzzes. It's allowing yourself to rest without guilt. It's giving yourself permission to not be everything for everyone. And it's also accepting that some people will be upset by this shift, that some will call you distant or say you've changed. But those reactions only prove how much they relied on your self-abandonment to stay comfortable. Real connection respects your limits. Real love doesn't require your constant exhaustion. When you begin treating your energy like it matters, you start noticing who drains it and who replenishes it. You start recognizing patterns. Who only comes around when they need something? Who leaves you feeling heavy after every interaction? Who respects your boundaries without being told twice? You don't need to explain the shift to everyone. You just live it quietly, firmly, consistently. And soon your life begins to feel lighter. Not because everything around you changed, but because you did. You stopped giving your best energy to things that didn't deserve it. You stopped trading peace for approval. Your energy is your life force. It fuels your creativity, your relationships, your clarity, your resilience. When you stop being so available and start being more intentional, you don't become colder, you become clearer. You show the world that your time is precious, but your energy, that's sacred. And only those who respect it get to share in it. Scarcity increases respect. It's a truth most people don't realize until they step back and start observing what happens when they're no longer always there. When you're constantly available, always picking up, always showing up, always ready to solve someone else's problem, You become familiar, and in time, that familiarity turns into invisibility, not because you aren't valuable, but because people start expecting you. They stop appreciating the effort. They assume you'll always be there, so they stop showing gratitude. But the moment you become less accessible, something shifts. People begin to notice your absence. They feel the gap your presence used to fill. And that's when respect starts to grow. There's something powerful about not always being reachable, about taking a step back without making an announcement. It's not about playing games. It's about letting your absence speak, because it does. When you're no longer the first to respond, when you stop being the safety net, when you stop offering your time freely, the people around you start to pay attention. They start to wonder if they've taken you for granted. They reflect on how they treated your consistency, and some of them will shift. They'll start treating your time with more care. They'll be more intentional when they reach out. They'll understand that access to you is not automatic, it's earned. The truth is, we teach people how to treat us, and when we're always available, always agreeable, always bending, we send the message that we'll tolerate anything. But when we remove that access, when we create distance, when we say no without giving a long explanation, we reclaim our value. We remind people that we are not an endless resource, that our attention has weight, that our presence has meaning, and that we will no longer allow it to be taken lightly. This kind of scarcity doesn't mean isolation. It means discernment. You begin to show up where you're seen, not where you're used. You spend time where you feel energized, not where you feel drained. And over time, your relationships become sharper, clearer, more respectful. People either rise to meet your new standard or they fall away. Either way, you win, because you're no longer living in reaction. You're living with intention. You're no longer giving yourself away to those who only remember you when it's convenient. Respect often doesn't come from giving more. It comes from giving less, wisely, from being intentional with your yes and firm with your no, from knowing that your availability is not your identity. And when you start operating this way, when people realize that your time, your presence, your energy, none of it is guaranteed, you'll see who truly values you, not for what you do, but for who you are. And in that space, real respect is born. Quiet, steady, earned. Distance reveals priorities. You learn more about people when you take a step back than when you stay constantly close. It's easy for someone to say they care, to claim they value you, to speak about loyalty and love when you're always within reach. But when you create a little distance, when you stop initiating, when you stop making yourself constantly available, when you let the silence stretch, that's when the truth surfaces. That's when people's actions begin to speak louder than their words. Because distance doesn't create disconnection. It reveals it. It shows who was holding on and who was just leaning in because it was easy. When you stop chasing, stop checking in first, stop fixing things they never apologized for, you begin to see who's really there. Some people will drift, and they were supposed to. They weren't building with you. They were just using the convenience of your presence. Others will notice the space, feel the absence, and step forward. They'll reach out, not because they feel entitled to your time, but because they genuinely care. And in that simple gesture, you'll feel the difference. You'll know who values you for you and not just for what you offer. Distance is a filter. It clears out noise. It makes the picture sharper. It shows you who's willing to meet you halfway. When you're always available, always present, always initiating, it becomes hard to know who's there out of habit and who's there out of love. But when you create a gap, no announcements, no dramatics, just quiet space, the right people lean in, they ask how you're doing, they check in, they adjust, and the others, they disappear. They may accuse you of changing, they may guilt trip you for the silence, but deep down you'll know this: you didn't change. They just never intended to match your energy in the first place. And maybe that's the hard part, realizing how many connections were one-sided. How many relationships were built on your effort, your presence, your emotional labor? But it's also freeing because once you see it, you can't unsee it. And once you know where people stand without your constant involvement, you can finally stop trying to convince them to stay. You stop trying to hold on to people who never truly held you. You begin to choose peace over performance. Distance doesn't make you cruel. It makes you conscious. Conscious of who sees your worth without reminders. Conscious of who's willing to pour into you when you're not the one always giving. And that kind of clarity, it changes the way you love, the way you give, the way you receive. You stop wasting time on those who only valued the version of you that was constantly available, and you start building a life with people who value the real you, even when you're quiet, even when you need space, even when you stop showing up first. If space invites growth, there's something sacred about no longer filling every moment, every silence, every relationship with your presence. When you stop being constantly available, you stop crowding your own life with obligations that don't serve you. You start breathing again, not just physically, but mentally, emotionally, spiritually. And in that breath, in that space, you finally allow something beautiful begins to happen. You grow, you evolve, you rediscover parts of yourself that were buried under the weight of always being on for others. Growth doesn't happen in chaos. It doesn't thrive in environments where you're constantly reacting, constantly pleasing, constantly running on empty. It needs space, it needs quiet, it needs room to stretch. And the more you pull back from the noise, the more you realize how much of your life was shaped by other people's expectations. You start noticing habits that were never really yours, just patterns you picked up to keep the peace. You recognize decisions you made to stay liked, not aligned. And for the first time, you give yourself permission to shed all of it. When you create space, you no longer just survive, you begin to choose. You choose your thoughts instead of being consumed by others' opinions. You choose your peace instead of performing for approval. You choose your priorities instead of inheriting them from everyone around you. And those choices, they begin to reshape everything. They push you forward. They help you grow into someone who doesn't just exist in the background of others' lives, but someone who stands fully, deeply, authentically in their own. But growth isn't always comfortable. Sometimes the space you create feels lonely at first. You may miss the constant messages, the buzzing notifications, the need to be needed. You may feel a little lost in the quiet. That's normal because for so long, you've identified yourself through your availability, through being the one who's always there. So when that role fades, what's left can feel unfamiliar. But keep going. That discomfort, it's just growing pains. It's the beginning of something stronger, deeper, freer. You'll find yourself in new ways. You'll discover passions that have been neglected, ideas that have been pushed aside, dreams that have been delayed because you were always wrapped up in someone else's chaos. And slowly you'll begin to build a life that feels like it fits, not a life dictated by pressure or obligation, but one rooted in alignment. One that grows not just outward, but inward. One where your time, your energy, your presence are directed toward becoming who you're always meant to be. When you're always available, you're too close to see your own potential. But when you give yourself space, real space, everything opens up, the clarity comes, the healing starts, the real growth begins. And it's not loud, it's not showy, but it's real. It's lasting. It's you finally becoming whole. Illness attracts strength. In a world that rewards urgency, noise, and nonstop movement, choosing stillness feels almost rebellious. We're taught to always be doing something, to always respond, to always prove we're valuable by our output. But there comes a point when you realize that your strength isn't in how much you hustle, it's in how deeply you know when to pause. When you stop being constantly available, you step away from that chase. You stop needing to prove yourself in every moment to everyone. And in that stillness, you begin to feel a different kind of power. The kind that doesn't yell, the kind that doesn't seek attention, the kind that comes from within. Being still doesn't mean being passive. It means being grounded. It means you're no longer tossed around by every opinion, every demand, every emotional storm that comes your way. You become centered, and people feel it. They may not be able to name it, but they'll sense that something is different about you. You're not shaken by little things anymore. You don't rush to respond out of fear or guilt. You carry a calm that doesn't need validation. That kind of energy can't be faked. It's built in silence. Stillness gives you room to observe, to listen without reacting, to choose your words, to understand your own emotions instead of getting swallowed by everyone else's. It gives you time to reflect on what you really want, what really matters, and who really belongs in your space. And when you operate from that level of clarity, you stop over-explaining. You stop begging to be understood. You start moving with intention instead of impulse. That's strength. The kind that grows quietly, far from the spotlight. There's also a deep confidence that comes from not needing to be everywhere for everyone. You no longer rush to fix what's not yours to fix. You no longer stretch yourself thin just to be accepted. You stand still and let others come to you, not out of arrogance, but out of peace. Because you finally trust your own presence enough to know that you don't need to chase anything that's meant for you. That the right people, the right opportunities, the right moments, they will meet you where you are, not because you're loud, but because you're aligned. Stillness is where self-respect takes root. It's where you stop proving and start embodying. It's where you stop being reactive and start being reflective. And when you live from that place, you stop giving your energy to things that don't match your values. You stop fighting for seats at tables where you were never truly welcome. You stop performing. You simply exist, whole, clear, calm, and the world begins to respond to you differently. Not because you've done more, but because you've finally learned how to do less on purpose. When you stop being constantly available and start embracing stillness, your strength becomes undeniable, not loud, not dramatic, but steady, deep, and unshakable.